Rain tapped furiously against the tin roof, its rhythm erratic, like a heart in panic. The kitchen was barely lit, one bulb flickering above the rusted sink, casting jagged shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Amara stood barefoot on the cracked linoleum floor, her nightgown clinging to her legs, damp with sweat or maybe tears, was hard to tell. Her hands shook as she stared at the letter, its elegant seal now torn and crumpled in her fist. When the back door creaked open, she didn't turn. She knew his steps, slow, deliberate, heavy with exhaustion. Tariq entered, dripping from the storm, the scent of wet earth clinging to his skin, his eyes weary from another day in the fields. He barely had time to close the door behind him when she turned, the letter outstretched like a weapon, her voice breaking through the tension. "You've been hiding this from me all these years." Her words cracked like thunder. Tariq's face, streaked with rain and mud, remained still. He looked at her, not startled, not guilty, just calm but unreadable. "You don't understand," he said softly, the same voice he'd used to soothe cattle, to comfort her after the last miscarriage. She couldn't believe how steady he sounded. How dare he sound steady? She had given him 10 years. 10 years of dirt and drought, of dead seeds and dead dreams. She had bled beside him, wept beside him, starved beside him. For what? For a lie. Amara slapped the letter against his chest. He didn't flinch. An invitation to a coronation. Your coronation. The paper fluttered to the ground like something ashamed. Her breath hitched, her shoulders buckled. "Who even are you?" she whispered, as if saying it too loud would tear open whatever spell they'd been under. The silence between them thickened, filled with everything unsaid. And then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The light above flickered once more and went out. 10 years earlier, the sun had shone brighter, and Amara's world had seemed full of possibility. She was 24 then, sharp-minded, spirited, fresh out of university in Lagos with a degree in economics and a future. Her parents had carefully arranged like fine china on a display shelf. They had plans, a promising job at her uncle's firm, a penthouse apartment in Victoria Island, and a suitor named Wealthy, polished, with a family legacy of banking and politics. But Amara wanted none of it. The moment she met Tariq, everything else began to blur. He was quiet, almost shy, with a softness in his eyes that drew her in. He sold yams and tomatoes at the roadside near campus and, in his spare time, scribbled poems on the backs of receipts. He spoke like someone who lived closer to the soil than to people, but when he did speak, it mattered. He listened, really listened. He remembered things, small things, like how she took her tea, or the name of the book she couldn't finish. Their love was quiet, but consuming something that didn't beg for attention, but rooted itself deep. Against her parents' firm objections and Nina's tearful protests, Amara left Lagos and the life she'd always known. She married Tariq under the open sky of his village, in a modest ceremony attended by neighbors and a few curious goats. Her mother didn't come. Her father had shaken his head in quiet defeat. In that first year, they lived in a small mud brick house surrounded by fields and hills. She learned to carry water from the well, to wash clothes by hand, to measure time by the position of the sun. There was laughter, then shared jokes over burnt rice, kisses under mosquito nets, love made with the urgency of people who had nothing but each other, but dreams, it turned out, didn't feed the soil. The first harvest failed, then the second. Rain came late, or not at all. They watched seedlings wither in their sleep. Then came the miscarriages, 2 of them, small lives that flickered briefly in Amara's womb before vanishing into grief. They didn't speak much about it. The villagers gave sympathetic glances but no words. Tariq would hold her in the night, his arms tight around her, but his silence became its own kind of distance. She would often find him alone under the Nime tree, scribbling in that same worn notebook, staring out into the fields as if waiting for something that never arrived. Letters came occasionally thin, official-looking envelopes with foreign stamps and strange crests. Amara once asked about them. He smiled, folded them neatly, and said, "Nothing important." She didn't believe him, but she let it go. There were other things to worry about. Bills that never stopped, roofs that leaked, a bank account that barely breathed. She tried to make extra money selling handmade soap and vegetables in the market, but it was never enough. Her old friends stopped calling. Nina married a banker and moved to South Africa. Amara's phone calls to her mother went unanswered. She had traded glass towers for tin roofs, boardrooms for chicken coops, and the weight of that choice sometimes felt unbearable. Still, she stayed, because she loved him, because she believed in him, because she had built her life on the foundation of their love, even as the cracks began to show. But over time, a question began to gnaw at her in the quiet moments when Tariq would turn his back to her at night, or when another letter arrived and was tucked away like a secret. Had she given up everything for a man who never gave her all of himself? The letter wasn't meant for her. It had arrived that morning, slipped between the usual stack of weather-stained bills and worn catalogues, its thick cream envelope gleaming like something foreign, almost regal. Amara noticed the golden emblem embossed on the seal, a strange, intricate crest she didn't recognize. Out of habit, she tore it open before reading the name. What spilled out wasn't a bill or a promotion or a village announcement. It was a formal letter written in a careful hand, addressing the Honourable Tariq Idwell, crown descendant of the House of Ilham. The words felt like fire on her skin. It spoke of a royal succession, of urgent obligations, of family duties long deferred. It referenced his royal bloodline as if Tariq weren't just a man but a legacy. Amara read it twice, her breath growing shallow, her fingers numb. By the time Tariq returned home from the fields, mud on his boots and weariness on his brow, she was waiting, letter in hand, voice trembling. "What is this?" she asked, holding it up like an accusation. He froze. For the first time in years, she saw fear in his eyes. "You opened my letter," he said softly, but the words barely landed. Amara stepped forward, the pages rattling. "Royal bloodline, House of Ilham La. What is this, Tariq?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze dropped to the floor, then to the table, as though searching for the right way out of a room that no longer had doors. "It's nothing," he finally muttered. "It doesn't matter anymore." His voice was small. She stared at him, stunned. "Nothing. We've spent winters boiling yam peels to make soup. We've buried 2 unborn children. I lost my mother over you, and you've been keeping this from me." Tariq shook his head, but still said nothing more. Just silence's old, quiet refuge. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. He'd turned away again, as he often did now, lost in whatever world he kept locked behind his silence. But this time, she couldn't let it go. When the rhythmic sound of his breathing told her he was asleep, she slipped out from under the mosquito net and padded to the old chest in the corner of the room, the one he never opened. Her heart pounded. With a small knife, she pried the latch loose and lifted the lid. Inside were remnants of a life she had never seen. Dozens of unopened letters, all bearing the same crest. Faded photographs of a boy erect in embroidered robes, standing beside men in flowing agbadas and women adorned in coral beads. In one, he was seated in an ornate chair that could only be a throne, a golden crown resting in his lap. And then there was the envelope, sealed in red wax, marked with the words, "To my son, when he's ready." Her hands trembled as she held it, but she didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her eyes blurred with tears. The realization hit her not like thunder, but like a slow, steady drowning. Tariq hadn't just hidden a past, he'd hidden himself. She thought she knew him. The man who planted cassava with calloused hands, who quoted lines of poetry by lantern light, who kissed her forehead after every disappointment. But now she couldn't tell if he had ever truly belonged to her. She just a chapter in his rebellion, a detour from a life of expectation, a punishment he'd chosen for himself. Questions clawed at her, each one more brutal than the last. Did he marry me because I was safe, because I asked nothing of him? Was the first his rebellion, or was I his prison? The chest remained open as she sat there on the dirt floor, the past spilling out around her like floodwater. In that moment, Amara wasn't angry because he was royalty. She was angry because he'd let her believe they were the same two ordinary people making an honest life out of nothing. He'd watched her give up everything, watched her struggle, mourn, endure without once offering the truth, and now all she could see was the betrayal woven into every silence, every kiss, every night they had held each other close. The silence stretched longer each evening, thick and suffocating, like smoke clinging to the corners of their home. Dinners became rituals of avoidance to plates placed out of habit, food left untouched, eyes rarely meeting. Amara no longer cooked with care or love. Sometimes she didn't cook at all. She slept in the smaller room now, the one they had once planned to turn into a nursery. Tariq didn't protest. He said nothing, only nodded when she passed him in the hallway or offered a strained good night that hung in the air like a wound. The soft, gentle rhythm of their old life had fractured into silence and suspicion. Amara felt herself becoming someone else, sharper, colder. She had given this man her youth, her dreams, and he had answered her devotion with secrets. She no longer reached for his hand at night, no longer waited by the gate for him to return, and he, in turn, began slipping out for hours without explanation. He would leave just before dusk, claiming to check on the eastern field or help a neighbor fix a fence, but she knew better. The guilt hung over him like mist, visible in the way he moved, the way he avoided her gaze, as though it might expose the parts of him he still kept hidden. When Nina visited from the city, the truth came sharper than any letter. She had aged in the polished, effortless way city women do: sharp clothes, confident voice, eyes that didn't miss a thing. She saw the tension in the air before Amara even spoke. Over tea on the front porch, Nina leaned in, her tone low but firm. "This man has been lying to you, Amara, and I think you've forgotten who you are. You were brilliant, fearless. Now you're what? His silent shadow." Amara didn't reply, but her eyes stung with the truth she had tried to ignore. That night, as she sat alone, she sifted through the few clues Tariq had left exposed over the years. She remembered the foreign stamps, the cryptic letters, the faint accent he slipped into during sleep, the phone calls he always took outside. She began watching him more closely, and then, one rainy afternoon, she followed him, slipping into her slippers and shawl. She kept her distance as he cut across the fields and down the dusty road toward town. He stopped at a rusted payphone near the old post office and, unaware of her presence behind the Naim tree, dialed a number and began speaking in a dialect she didn't recognize. It wasn't Yoruba, it wasn't Hausa, it was something older, richer, something royal. The tone in his voice was different too, authoritative, confident, not the soft-spoken man she knew. When she returned home, her thoughts were no longer tangled, they were sharp and cutting. Later that week, she found a bank slip tucked between pages of a forgotten book, proof of a wire transfer to someone in London. The recipient's name was unfamiliar, but the amount was staggering. All the while, they had been choosing between soap and cooking oil, and he was sending money abroad. That night, she waited for him, standing by the open chest he once kept locked. When he walked in, soaked from the rain again, his face fell at the sight. He didn't try to stop her this time. "You lied to me," Amara said, her voice shaking, not with fear but with fury. "All these years, I thought we were partners. I thought we were building something together. But you've been living in two worlds and letting me rot in just one. Tariq sat down, slowly, as though the weight of the moment threatened to crush him. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he began to speak, not as the farmer she married, but as someone else entirely. I was born the son of a king, not here, not even in Nigeria, a small, oil-rich kingdom, Ilamla. My father was overthrown in a military coup when I was a boy. My mother was killed. I was smuggled out and sent to live with my uncle in Nigeria. I was told to keep my name quiet, to forget the past until it was safe, until peace returned. But I never forgot. He paused, as if reliving a life Amara could barely imagine. I was meant to reclaim the throne. I was groomed too, and then I met you. You were light, you were freedom, and for the first time, I wanted to choose something for myself. I chose you. I turned my back on everything else. His eyes searched hers, desperate for some sign of understanding. But then, why hide it? She asked, voice breaking. Why let me suffer? Let me carry all this weight, while you kept that truth locked away. His expression darkened, full of pain. Because once you knew, I feared you'd stop seeing me. You'd only see what I left behind. The crown, the palace, the lies. And maybe you'd leave. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. You're wrong, she whispered. I didn't stop seeing you because of what you were. I stopped seeing you because you wouldn't let me see you at all. She stepped back, the distance between them now more than just physical. It's too late, Tariq. I already don't recognize you anymore. His shoulders slumped, and for once, he looked like a man with nothing left to hide, nothing left to give. The truth had come too late, and it echoed between them like the final toll of a bell. Tariq left before dawn, taking only a small bag and leaving behind the faint scent of old cologne and rain-damp earth. He didn't say goodbye. Amara woke to find his side of the bed cold, the house emptier than it had ever felt, not just in presence, but in spirit. For days, she drifted through the motions, feeding the chickens, sweeping the dust, avoiding neighbors' curious glances. Then the letter arrived. A courier handed it to her with a reverent bow, as though the paper itself held power. It was thick and ornate, bearing the golden crest she had come to recognize. The message inside was brief, but devastating. Tariq 8-4 was to be officially reinstated as monarch of Ilamla. A coronation ceremony would take place in the capital. It was an international affair, and nowhere was Amara's name mentioned. Not as wife, not as consort, not even as a footnote in the story of his rise. Rage and heartbreak surged through her like a tide. She had sacrificed everything for this man, lived through storms and silence and secrets, only to be erased from the final chapter. She didn't think. She packed a bag, bought a cheap bus ticket, and made the long journey to the capital, her body jostled and aching with each mile. She arrived at the palace gates under a sweltering afternoon sun, her simple dress and worn sandals drawing stares from the polished guards and lavishly dressed courtiers. When she reached the gate, a soldier held out a hand. Name Diast. Amara Aidwell, she said, her voice steady. The guard frowned, checked a list, then shook his head. You're not on the registry, madam. This event is by invitation. Only, I was his wife, she said through clenched teeth. I am, but her voice faltered as realization struck. Even now, he was keeping her outside. As the guards turned her away, a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Then, like the parting of a curtain, the crowd shifted and there he was. Tariq, robed in deep purple, a golden sash crossing his chest, a crown at rest in his hand. He looked older, grander, like a version of himself she had never known but somehow always sensed. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world paused. He stepped forward, and people parted instinctively. Amara stood frozen at the threshold. You married me in the dirt, she said, voice rising, raw, and left me there. Gasps rang out. Courtiers whispered. A woman in pearls shielded her child's ears. Tariq didn't flinch. His gaze held hers, steady and unashamed. No, he said calmly. I gave up everything for you. I chose a life of obscurity, of poverty, because I loved you more than I feared the weight of the crown. But you never asked why I made that choice. His words struck like thunder. She stepped back, unsure, breath catching in her throat. You lied to me, she said, quieter now, not just once, for years. Tariq nodded. Because I knew what the truth could do, not to me, to us. I was afraid. Afraid you'd see a king and forget the man. Afraid you'd feel small beside a title I never wanted. He gestured around him, the palace, the silk, the ceremony. This isn't who I am. It's who I was born to be. But what I chose was a woman who looked me in the eye when I had nothing. A woman who saw me whole. Her throat tightened. The fury that had sustained her over the past few days began to waver, melting beneath the weight of something far more complicated. He hadn't just been hiding. He had been protecting himself, her, them. So why now? She whispered. Why go back? Tariq looked at her, then not as a king, not as a stranger, but as the man who had once kissed her palms under a starless sky, because they called, and because the man I used to be owed something to the boy who lost everything. But I delayed it for a decade, Amara. For us, I needed to know what real love was before duty took me back. Silence fell, and in that silence, Amara saw the truth not in his words, but in his eyes. This had never been about deceit. It had been about fear, about love, about the impossible burden of being two things at once. Her anger didn't vanish, but it shifted, softened by understanding. As the crowd watched, waiting for her next move, she turned from the gate and walked away, not defeated, not broken, but with the dignity of a woman who finally saw the full picture. Behind her, the palace gleamed, but she no longer needed it to know who she was. The village had not changed much, but Amara had. When she returned, alone and carrying nothing but a canvas bag and a fire in her chest, people watched her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Whispers trailed behind her like dust, but she didn't flinch. She filed for separation with quiet determination, not out of spite, but clarity. The life she had lived had been tethered to another man's story, one layered in duty, silence, and secrets. Now she was ready to write her own. She sold what little she had and started a women's cooperative, gathering local wives, widows, and young girls under the shade of the old baobab tree. There, they learned to stitch, to plant, to manage money and markets. What started as a weekly gathering grew into a self-sustaining community force. Amara taught them not just survival, but confidence. People stopped seeing her as the one, the king, left behind, and began calling her Gia Alakoso, mother of the cooperative. The title made her smile, not because it gave her power, but because it reminded her of who she had always been under the weight of everything she gave up. In the quiet hours, she began writing, again not poetry, but letters, one each week, addressed to her mother. At first, there was no reply, but then came a short note, then a longer one, then a phone call. The rift between them didn't vanish, but it healed like old bark, slow, layered, resilient. Her mother, once so adamant in her disappointment, confessed to her own regrets. They spoke as women now, not just mother and daughter, equals, survivors of choices made in different kinds of love. Months passed before Tariq returned. No entourage, no crown, just the same quiet man in worn shoes, standing at the edge of the field where they once buried failed crops and whispered dreams into the dust. He waited until she noticed him, and when she approached, he said nothing at first. There was no speech, no apology, just a question, spoken softly. Would you come with me, as my queen? Or, He hesitated. Stay, and keep ruling your own life. Amara looked at him for a long time, really looked. She still saw the man she had loved, the one who quoted poetry and smiled with his eyes. But she also saw what she had become in his absence, someone complete, someone who had found her own crown without palaces or titles. She stepped closer, close enough for him to see the peace in her face. You may wear a crown now, she said gently, but I had to find mine the hard way, and I won't take it off. Tariq's shoulders dropped, but not in defeat, more like release. He nodded, finally seeing her not just as a chapter from his past, but as a story still unfolding, one he no longer needed to define. He turned to leave, pausing only to offer a quiet farewell. Amara watched him disappear down the road, the setting sun casting long shadows across the fields. Then she turned back to her women, her work, her world. Her crown was invisible, yes, but it was hers, and she wore it with pride. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and gold as Amara sat beneath the wide arms of the old Nime tree. Around her, laughter bubbled like spring water, young girls weaving strands of raffia, their fingers clumsy but eager. She guided them gently, showing them how to loop, and not with patience only earned through years of surviving storms. The village was quiet in that sacred way it gets, just before nightfall, when the air cools and everything exhales. Amara leaned back against the tree trunk and pulled out her phone. Its screen cracked in one corner, but still holding fragments of her past. She scrolled slowly, pausing on an old photo she and Tariq in the rain, soaked and laughing, there, arms wrapped around each other, mud splashed up their legs, joy written in every crease of their faces. For a moment, she forgot everything that came after. Her lips curved into a soft smile. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not of pain, but of release. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to carry what no longer belongs to you. I married a farmer for love. Her voice echoed quietly in her mind, like a hymn. I stayed for hope. And when the crown came calling, I realized the real royalty was in choosing myself. She breathed in deep, the scent of dust, sunlight, and promise heavy in the air. Then she stood, brushing the raffia strands from her lap, and gathered the girls with a clap. They followed her toward the small community center, walls faded but firm, built with hands that had once trembled but no longer did. The sun framed her as she walked, casting her silhouette long and steady across the earth. There was no crown on her head, no royal title behind her name. But as the doors opened and she stepped inside, surrounded by laughter, work, and purpose, she carried herself like a queen. And this time, it was all her own.